I wish there were channels such as yours when I decided to go to Thailand for the first time. It would have helped me to understand things better and not make so many stupid errors. But when I went to Thailand, social media was in its infancy. I remember there were some websites where you could go to do some research, but nothing like today. So I think you're doing a valuable service for people who are thinking about Thailand for retirement or love. I was going for both after coming out of a very dull marriage back in the UK. We lasted until our children left home and we split up not long after, and I vowed to never have another English partner. I was 52, so what chance would I have in England to get what I wanted? I went to Thailand after a close friend, who also got divorced in England, moved there a few years prior. He kept going on about how it was the best decision he had ever made, and he encouraged me to come and see for himself. I was semi-retired at this point. We sold our house in the UK when we got divorced and split the proceedings. Never mind that I was the one who worked and paid for it. The house sale gave me £300,000 in my pocket, and my friend, who moved to Thailand, told me just how cheap Thailand was. So if I invested that money carefully and got 5%, that would give me an okay living in Thailand. That was my plan going in until things inevitably changed. I'd never visited Thailand in the past, so I didn't know what to expect. I had an idea in my mind of what I thought Thailand was, and when I arrived, I found that it was even better than I could have imagined. I immediately decided that I didn't want to return to England ever again if I didn't need to. Thailand offered me a fresh start, and I wanted to take full advantage of it. My friend showed me the condo he was renting in Bangkok, and what you could get for the money blew me away. And of course, he took me to the famous nightlife spots that I believe everyone should visit if they go to Thailand. I found myself visiting these places daily, and I felt young again. Thailand had turned my life around, and I made my mind up to stay and not return back to England. I didn't need to go back. I didn't even care about all my things in England. And just like that, I became an expat in Thailand. With my money invested, I was getting an income that could cover an okay life in Thailand. But I quickly found out it wasn't enough to be able to go out every night and frequent the bars whenever I wanted. I had to do this in moderation. If I was careful, I could stay in Thailand indefinitely, so I took my budget very seriously during the first few months of being in Thailand. My friend had recently married to a Thai, and he and his wife introduced me to one of his wife's friends, who I was told was looking for a foreign husband. She was my first experience dating a Thai girl, and I felt like it was a lot easier than in England, not as complicated and not as many expectations put on you. We didn't end up together, but she did give me the confidence to go after what I was looking for. The lady I ended up marrying did work in a bar, but I dated a few girls who didn't work in a bar before her, so the fact she did work in one is just part of who she was. It didn't define her, and I didn't mind. I know it's cliché to say she was different to the other girls that worked in bars, but to me she was. When I met her, I was just out on Soi 4 on one of my budgeted nights out. I walked in the bar where she was working, with no intention of speaking to any girls that night, but one thing led to another, and I found myself back at her bar night after night for weeks. This caused me to spend out of budget, but I thought it was worth it, as I was falling for this girl. Things moved fast. I feel when you're in Thailand, you can dictate the speed of how you like to do things, and your girl will just go along with you. And I probably rushed too quickly into the relationship, as she was living with me within the month. The whole dynamic of my life in Thailand changed when we started living together, and the thing I found out straight away was that I couldn't keep to my budget anymore. She wasn't working anymore, and I needed to support her financially, which I didn't mind doing. But after we'd been together for a few months, I had to dip into my savings. £1,000 here, £1,000 there. But I thought this would stop soon when we developed a routine and got to know each other a lot better. Thailand can be a cheap place to live if you stick to a rigid way of life. But the moment you want to do anything that's only slightly out of the ordinary, it's going to cost you. And my girl liked to spend money. After a while, it got to the point where I had to tell her what our budget was, and was she okay with that? If we managed to stay in budget, things would be fine. And we managed for a few months, but wow, was life boring. We decided to get married. I felt like she was the love of my life, and I wanted to be able to call her my wife. I had to dip into my savings for that, to pay for the party in the village. I got to meet her whole family, and I was fascinated at just how different life was in the countryside to how it was in Bangkok. Although it was very basic and primitive living, it reminded me of the place I grew up in England, very rural and not built up. A guy showed up to our wedding ceremony, and he was introduced as being the foreign husband of a girl that came from the village. He was from Germany, and they had built a house in the village, and they now lived there full time. He took me to look at his house, and it looked fantastic. He was just in the process of having a pool installed in the garden, and I could see myself living somewhere like that. He said he loved his life and wouldn't want to go back to Pattaya, where he used to live, before moving to the village. I could tell my wife liked being in the village. She looked a lot more at home and more comfortable than she did in Bangkok. She also had a child there who currently lived with her parents, and she seemed so much happier there than in Bangkok. This led to one of the biggest blunders I made. When we got back home, we really had to struggle to stay within budget. We had rent to pay, utilities, and normal day-to-day costs. I thought back to the guy we met in the village, saying that they were living on half what I was spending in Bangkok. He said it was far cheaper. Fresh produce was available from the local market. He didn't have any rent as he owned his house, and the big macro wasn't too far away if we wanted to do a big shop. I did some sums and thought if I dipped into my savings to build a small house in the village, my income would decrease, but it would go a lot further, and we should be able to have a better life there. I also liked the idea of living in a house on some land, having a dog, and being able to do things that you couldn't do in a small condo in the sky. I asked my wife what she thought of the idea of moving to the village and building a house, and she jumped all over the idea, and we made the decision to move there quickly, as we were back within a week looking at land plots. We bought a plot, obviously in my wife's name due to foreigners not being allowed to own land in Thailand, for 400,000 baht. It was big enough to be able to build a house and also have a good-sized garden. I wanted to get into gardening and to be able to grow all sorts of things, so it was going to be perfect for that. We spent 2.5 million baht building the house, 700,000 on a car, 50,000 on a bike, and around 300,000 furnishing the house. All in, I'd spent around £100,000 of my savings, leaving me with 200,000. I thought this would still give me a good return, and should be enough to live in the village, and I was expecting to be able to live well on that. It was a big gamble to spend a third of my money, but when we finally could move into the house when it was ready, I thought the gamble was worth it. It was a lot more affordable to live there than in Bangkok, and we were easily managing to stay within budget. My wife seemed to be happy to be living in the village. She was always happy at that time, and I felt like we made the right decision and life was good. I started growing different varieties of chili to keep myself busy, and we got a Labrador, a dog I'd always wanted. The first year of living there was great, and I wasn't getting bored being so far away from anything. I was liking the solitude, and I even became friends with the German guy who lived in the village. My wife was always coming up with ideas of how she was going to make some money. She bought lottery tickets and was always disappointed when she lost. She tried doing all kinds of things, but nothing really worked. She tried to sell noodles, sell clothes, all kinds of things. I just thought it was good that she was keeping busy and was trying to make money to support herself. I was able to support her on the income I was getting, but she always seemed like she wanted to keep busy and do something for herself. So when she came to me saying she had an idea of opening a shop in the village and she needed a bit of money to build it, I didn't think anything of dipping into my savings again so she could build the shop. It's so cheap to build basic structures in the village. For £5,000 she had a shop built on some land that belonged to her mother. Another £1,500 to stock the shop, and I'd taken £6,500 out of my £200,000 in savings on the understanding that my income would drop, but she'd be able to support herself, so I should still be better off by doing this. She was able to make a few hundred baht per day, so I felt like the gamble I took to build the shop was worth it. She was working in the shop herself for the first 3 months of opening it, and she came to me saying it was going well, and she had another good idea. If we got someone to work in the shop, that would free up her time to be able to do something else. She wanted to open a restaurant just outside the village on the big road. Her father had a rice farm there currently, but she said we could raise the land at the front and build a restaurant. She loved cooking. She always cooked for me, and her food was great. And this would be a huge gamble though. It would cost a lot more than the shop cost, but it should make more. And I didn't really think about it for very long, and I agreed to go ahead and build the restaurant. Another gamble with my savings, but I felt it was connecting us to Thailand, and if it could do half as well as my wife thought it would, it could replace the income the money was providing and give me a lot more as well. I told my wife I would need a share of the profits as my income would go down to build the restaurant, and she agreed. Looking back, we didn't need to do anything and we would have been fine. But it was exciting to be doing things and also seeing my wife happy. So all in, we ended up spending around £35,000 to raise the land and build a really nice restaurant. It was in a good spot, being close to the big road, and when my wife opened for the first day, people loved the food. These were meals being sold at 40 baht, 50 baht, so normal Thai prices for the area. We quickly found out, however, that opening the restaurant was not the best idea. She was making some money from it, but the margins were tiny, and she'd be busy cooking all day for only 100 or 200 baht. Definitely not worth the amount I'd invested in it, but I thought at least it's making some money. I wasn't seeing any of it though, and by this time my income was getting smaller, and I was not being able to replace it with anything else. She'd been running the restaurant for around 3 months, and out of the blue, one day, she said she was tired of doing it and was going to stop as it wasn't making enough money. I couldn't believe she did this without even talking to me, as even though it was only making a bit, it was still a bit, but she said she wanted to try something else that would make more money. The shop was making a small amount of profit after paying the person she got to work there, but after working things out, it made about enough to cover the fuel used to go to Macro every week to buy the supplies for the shop. My wife couldn't understand this, and these were the first signs that the gambles I was taking were not paying off. We now had a restaurant that was closed and a shop that wasn't actually making any money, and my income had gone down to a lot less because my savings at this point were £150,000. They had halved in only a few years, and even I was now thinking of something to do to try to make money, as the income it produced wasn't enough to cover the cost of living in the village. I was banking on the shop and restaurant being able to fully cover my wife's living expenses and give me some income as well, but opening them had only made the situation worse. This was the first time that my wife and I started to fall out on a regular basis. I wanted her to do something with the restaurant, as it was just sat there and had cost a lot of money to build, but she was adamant that it wouldn't work. Why she thought it would and was happy for me to invest a lot of money in it, and why the change of heart, I have no idea. The next year, I found myself dipping into savings too much, and they were continuing to go down and down and I was getting desperate. The situation took its toll on our relationship, but I decided to take one more gamble on the hopes of turning things round, and that was an idea that my wife had to buy some farm machinery and rent it out to people who needed it. What she was saying made sense, and I spent around £40,000 on tractors and rice harvesters. The fact that I blindly trusted that my wife knew what she was doing was my biggest downfall. My savings had dropped to just shy of £100,000, and everything was riding on us being able to make a good return on the things we had just bought. Initially, things seemed to be going according to plan. Things were being rented out often, and my wife seemed to be managing the business properly. That is, until I discovered that people were not paying straight away. The agreement was that they were to pay after they sold their crops, and that could be a long time away, or if the crop failed, they may not even be able to afford to pay us. People were putting wear and tear on the machines, and we were not seeing any return. I couldn't believe it when my wife told me this. I left things up to her, as she seemed to be so confident in her own abilities and was so sure of what she was doing. I would never have guessed that she would let people use the machines without paying first. She told me that that was just how it worked there, but I wanted to know why she didn't share this quite important fact before she had me spending all the money. She told me not to worry, and everyone will pay, and if they don't pay, it won't look good for them in the village. People did pay, but about 25% never did. But the price she was charging, when taking into consideration depreciation and wear and tear, just wasn't worth it. This is when I started to realise that gambling my retirement funds away on harebrained schemes of my wife was the most idiotic thing I could have done. Then, to top the whole thing off, someone had badly damaged one of the tractors, so much so that it had to be written off. And did she get insurance on it? No, a total loss. I suppose I can only blame myself, but I thought we'd be able to make something work in the village that could add to my income. But all that happened was my income dropped and wasn't replaced with anything else. I decided we needed to sell everything we had, the remaining tractors and other machines, and my wife was furious, saying it was making money, so I reluctantly let her keep them. I found that we were not getting on anymore. I'd wished we never left Bangkok, and I was blaming her for my own stupid choices. While she was asking me for money to do things, I could have said no, but the thought of making more money was exciting, and I thought because she came from there, she knew how things worked and would be able to be a success. But coming to terms with the fact I only had 100 grand in savings left at 5%, it wasn't close to being enough to live on. All the money I spent could be seen in plain sight. The shop, the restaurant, and now all this machinery. But there was no way for me to get my money back. I told my wife I really wanted to sell everything. Maybe we could rent out the restaurant. We needed to do something to recoup some money. But she failed to see the severity of the situation for me. She was from there and was used to spending no money at all. But I wasn't. I wasn't Thai. And I had expenses that Thai people just don't have, such as visas, insurance, and a whole list of things I needed that I couldn't afford anymore. We pushed on with the relationship for another 3 months, but I decided to break it off with her when I realised that all my money would be gone if I wasn't careful, and it would be gone soon. My wife was a lot more distant, and she was not happy anymore, and I told her that there was no money to do other things. She ended up keeping everything I sunk my money into: the house, car, bike, shop, restaurant, and machinery, and I left back to Bangkok after a huge row. There was no way it would have worked out with her. When I got to Bangkok, I met up with my friend, who I went to Thailand initially to visit, and I told him what happened, and he looked at me like I was crazy. He was still with his wife, in a rented condo, and hadn't made any big purchases in Thailand, and was doing fine. I, on the other hand, gambled away more than 2/3 of my savings on my now ex-wife's harebrained business ideas, thinking it was a good idea at the time. I had to go back to England and back to work. I was happy I still had some money left, just enough to buy a small house. But the lifestyle shock of being back in England was torture. I had to remain there for another 8 years until I had enough for retirement, round 2, back in Thailand, single and happy and not doing anything stupid. Gary.